What's up guys? Welcome back to In My House with Shaun O'Neal. Today we're making an amazing apricot bourbon glazed pork chop and one of my favorite side dishes, charred asparagus with an asparagus vinaigrette. Let's get cooking right now. Spring is definitely in the air. When the asparagus starts hitting the stores and it's fresh and it's beautiful, you know that the weather is going to start warming up. It's definitely one of my favorite springtime vegetables, and this is my favorite asparagus side dish. So we've already trimmed off the bottoms of the asparagus. I left a little bit of room to actually save some scraps, right, without them being too woody and chewy in the mouth. So we saved the scraps, and what we're going to do right now to kick this recipe off is make our vinaigrette. So what we're going to do is we're going to process all this down. It's a really easy vinaigrette. We're using some vegetable products though, so it's a little different than a vinaigrette you may be familiar with and accustomed to. So first thing we're going to do is take the scraps, cut about 1/4 of an inch long from one bunch of asparagus. Then we have one scallion, just rough chopped. We have about a tablespoon packed of parsley. You could use flat leaf, you could use curly parsley, either way. And then I've grated some garlic. I've grated the garlic because I want it to really infuse throughout the vinaigrette. I don't want it to kind of get stuck and clumpy and chunky and you really taste the garlic. It should kind of be subtle throughout the dish and throughout the sauce. So we'll get our grated garlic in there. Then we've got just a little bit of mustard, just enough mustard to help emulsify and bind this vinaigrette. So we're looking at about a teaspoon of mustard. And then some rice wine vinegar. We're looking at about 1/4 of a cup of rice wine vinegar. That will go straight in there as well. A little bit of honey for some sweetness. And then we obviously are going to season this with salt and pepper. And then about 1/2 cup of olive oil. So the olive oil is what's going to really bring this together and make this a vinaigrette. So a couple grinds of fresh cracked black pepper. And then about 1/2 cup of olive oil. I know a lot of vinaigrettes you sit there and drizzle in to try to emulsify. This one has so much going on in there. The honey, the mustard, and then all the vegetable product in there is going to help bind this. So we're going to do about 1/2 cup of olive oil. We'll put our lid on here and we'll give this guy a buzz. All right. Now that our vinaigrette is nice and smooth, silky, and that looks absolutely beautiful. All right, now that our vinaigrette is nice and smooth, we're just gonna transfer this to a bowl, put it in the fridge, and hold it until we're ready to use it. So it's time to make our apricot bourbon glaze. It's a perfect glaze for a pork chop. I had some dried apricots that were in my pantry that have been in there for a while, so I just covered them with bourbon just enough to kind of get over the top layer of those. There's 8 to 10 in there, and I probably use about 3/4 of a cup of bourbon. If you have fresh apricots, by all means use them. What I would do is make a puree and reduce the bourbon, and then when the bourbon is reduced, add the puree to that. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna add this to our pot or our saucepan here, and we're just gonna reduce the bourbon. So we're gonna cook this down until the bourbon is pretty much completely cooked away and you're just left with a little bit of a syrup at the bottom, and then of course the apricots. All right, now that our bourbon has pretty much completely reduced away, we're going to add the apricots and whatever's remaining of the bourbon to our little blender here. And we're going to add a little bit of chicken stock. The chicken stock is going to be added eventually, so we're just going to add this to help speed along the process of actually pureeing the apricots, the dried apricots in here. So again, if you're using fresh apricots, you would have already done this. So we're gonna puree this down and then we'll add it back to the pan. Okay, so once this is processed smooth, we'll bang it down, make sure we've got all of it. And if you've got a couple chunks in there, that's all right, especially if you're using dried. The processor has a little bit of a harder time breaking those down. This looks pretty good. This looks nice and smooth. If you do have some chunks, make sure you strain it before you actually serve it. So I'm gonna take the blade out and just add this straight back to our saucepan here. Bang it out, make sure you get as much as you can, and take a spatula in there and scrape out what's left. And then I'm gonna add the remaining chicken stock. So we're using about 2 cups. I used about 1/2 cup to start with, and then about 1.5 cups now. A little bit of sherry vinegar. For smokiness, I'm gonna add just a little bit of chipotle in adobo that I've processed down. I keep a lot of that on hand. I buy cans of it and I puree it down and leave it in the fridge to use it whenever I need it. It's really good to add smoky, a little bit of spicy. And then we've got about a half a cup of brown sugar, and we're gonna return this to the stove, let this come to a simmer, and then we're gonna turn it into a glaze. So you're looking for it to reduce until that nice, shiny, glossy glaze consistency. And that will take about 20 minutes. Okay, so now that our glaze is done, we're just gonna strain this because I do see a few chunks in there. We will set it aside until we're ready to cook our pork chops, which is right about now. So I like to pull my pork chops out of the fridge about 30 minutes before I'm gonna start cooking them. Same thing with steaks. Anything that you're gonna be cooking over a high, hot sear, and either finishing in that sear, like for instance on a grill or in a cast iron skillet, or searing it real quickly and then putting it in the oven to finish for no more than 10-15 minutes. So anything that you're going for like a medium or medium rare on, it's really important to pull out before you start cooking, a good 30 minutes before you start cooking. And if you're talking a big T-bone, you want to get that out maybe 45 minutes before you start cooking. Reason being is you want it to be room temperature all the way through. If you go to start cooking and it's still cold in the middle, you could have a very rare center when the outer edges are overcooked. So that's the theory and the process behind pulling meat out and letting it come to room temperature before it's seared and cooked off. Now you don't do that with ground beef or ground products. When it comes to bacteria, bacteria forms on the outer edges, right? So we're gonna sear this, we're gonna kill all that. With ground beef, it's all outer edges. So that bacteria can actually get inside of that meat. So ground beef is one of those things you wanna start cooking from cold. But with pork chops, we're gonna pull them out 30 minutes early. We're gonna salt them real lightly on both sides, and then we're just gonna let them sit for about 30 minutes until we start cooking. While our pork chop's resting, we'll go ahead and blanch off our asparagus, and then we'll transfer it into an ice bath to go ahead and shock it, lock in that color, and stop the cooking process. So when we char it, it doesn't overcook. So we get that nice char, but we still have that crisp bite that we love so much from asparagus. All right, we're ready to cook our pork chops. We've got our oven set to 400 degrees. Our cast iron skillet is smoky hot, and I've seasoned both sides of these pork chops with pepper. We already put salt on it earlier, 30 minutes ago, and that has penetrated into the meat to flavor the meat throughout. Now we're gonna add some olive oil to our cast iron skillet, and we're gonna sear these. Here's your pro tip for your pork chop. Start by searing the fat side first, this outer fat cap. What's gonna happen is that will render the fat, and when you flip it to the meat sides, you're basically basting it in its own fat, in its own juices. So start by searing the outer fat cap first, and then sear both sides. All right, so once all seared up on all sides, we're gonna go ahead and take our glaze that we made earlier and just brush this on, kind of dab it on. You don't wanna get rid of that pepper that we kind of coated on there earlier. So we'll brush this on both sides and on the side of the meat, down on the fat cap, along this side right here. Give these guys a little flip and do the other side, and then we're gonna flip them back over because the other side's our presentation side. That's the side that got that nice char on it, that nice crispiness on it. Pork chops can curl a little bit so you don't get that char and that nice crispy edges on the bottom side of this. So we'll go ahead and finish this off. We're gonna flip it over one more time, give it one more little glaze on the top side since that's the side that people will be seeing. And then we're gonna throw this in our 400 degree oven. It's gonna cook for about 15 minutes to about medium in the middle, so that's gonna be around 145 degrees if you're using a thermometer. Okay, so our pork chops are cooked and they look absolutely beautiful. We're gonna let them rest for probably about 5 to 10 minutes to absorb all those juices back up. They just went through a little bit of process with the sear and then high heat in the oven. So we're gonna let those rest for about 10 minutes. While we're doing that, we're gonna take our asparagus and we're gonna cook them in the same cast iron skillet that we used for our pork chops. So it's still got some of the pork fat in there. All I've done is just scraped out maybe some of the little burnt bits and then added just a touch more oil. Now we're gonna char our asparagus in that skillet. Should take about 5 to 6 minutes for it to get nice and charred and perfectly cooked through. Once asparagus is cooked through, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of butter and season lightly with salt and pepper. Our asparagus is cooked through, but still nice and crisp, so you still get that bite, that springtime freshness that we love from asparagus. So we'll take our asparagus vinaigrette And we'll pour in, you know, maybe 2 large spoonfuls. We can always add more. And then we're gonna toss this to coat. We wanna make sure that vinaigrette really touches all that warm asparagus. It really lightens and brightens up that vinaigrette when it has a little teeny touch of heat right at the end there. So we'll toss this, make sure all of our asparagus has vinaigrette covering. We'll set this aside. Now we'll come back and cut our pork, plate the dish, and have some dinner. These pork chops smell absolutely amazing. They've rested for about 10 minutes. We're gonna slice these guys up and go ahead and plate the dish. So I'm gonna go at just a very light bias, nothing too crazy. So it's about a perfect medium well. We went a little bit more than the medium. That's all right, beautiful medium well. So we'll slice this up, 1 pork chop per person, plate it up with that beautiful asparagus that we made. Oh wow. That is really, really delicious. So we'll grab our plate here, put down some of our asparagus right here on the side. Try to make kind of an even pile as much as you can. Asparagus can kind of get away from you a little bit here and there. Stack it up because this is delicious and it goes fast once you start rubbing down on it. So then we'll take our pork, slide our knife right under there, and we'll just kind of go right on the side of the asparagus, and then we'll kind of fan it just a little bit so you can see that juicy deliciousness in there. And then to top it, a little bit of green to top the pork off, just got some chopped scallion. And we'll just put that right down the middle of our pork. Kind of brightens up the whole dish, and it ties in with the asparagus. You know, we use the scallion in the asparagus, so that really kind of brings the whole dish together. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of In My House with Shaun O'Neal. That's about it. It's time to eat. Katie, it's time for dinner.
Woohoo!